All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's a beautiful Thursday evening, and thanks for the 6K likes on TikTok. I really appreciate it. Please don't stop our tapping. Let's keep our tapping and also sharing the live. And please, if you're on TikTok, kindly click on the heart icon to drop a heart me. If you remember already, kindly just drop a heart me. If you're not a member, please click to join and drop a heart me. These things help to push the live to the FYP. Thank you very much for your support. Today we're going to be listening to a recording we did a while back. It's titled Wiwa, the Untold Reactions to Ironsi's Unitary Decree. A lot of times when we talk about the events of 1966, we usually focus on we look at things from the perspective of the Igbos and also maybe from the northern perspective. Sometimes we do that, but it's important to look at different perspectives. So we did a session where we read Go On, the biography of a soldier statesman by J. Saro, which gives us a northern perspective. Back on to Self by Shehu Shagari gives us a northern perspective. We have the Western perspective from Adewale Ademuyiga's Why We Struck. We have the foreign perspective from John de St. George's Nigerian Civil War, and also Kirk Green's Crisis and Conflict in Nigeria. But it's also important to get the perspective of folks from the South. Now, we're not going to go deep into everything that happened to them, but want to listen to somebody who is not from any of the major groups talk about the unitary system and its effects on Nigeria. I want to welcome you once again. Thank you very much for joining us. I see you, Maya, morning from Texas. Good morning to you, wherever you are. My own time is Ife time. So, but I'm glad you're here. Thank you very much for joining us today. All right, let's do the housekeeping before we get into the conversation. If you're on YouTube and on Facebook, thank you very much for joining us. Kindly like the live stream and also share. And that's how it works. The algorithm requires engagement, right, in order to recommend the live stream to others. So please, on YouTube, on Facebook, and right here on TikTok, let's do that. We're not streaming on Twitter today. We're going to maybe tomorrow, I think. All right, but we're good where we are right now, and I think we can, make the best of it. Yemonite, Otojometa, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. Where are you? Are you in Ife time? Because if it's Ife time, I think that's what I'm rather, but I'm glad you're here. Thank you very much for joining us. So let's do that like next few seconds, and then we can get into the conversation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read the description. Right, I'm going to listen to the video together. By the way, it's a two-part video, a two-part series. It's a two-part series. So what we'll do is we'll listen to the first one, and so if you notice any breaks, that's what I'm saying. That if you notice any breaks, that's because we're trying to switch, to the second part. The first one is about 31 minutes, and the second one is about 30 minutes. So that's about 1 hour in all. But I'm just checking every platform to be sure we're good, and then we can dive right in. It's going to be a fantastic session. I'm going to enjoy it. Once we're done listening, folks can come up if you'd like to be part of the conversation. Maybe want to chip something in. You'll get the chance to do that after listening to the recording. All right, Ken Saro, the Untold Reactions to Ironsi's Unitary Decree. The primary source for this particular session is a book by Ken Saro himself. The book is titled On a Darkling Plain. Yeah, On a Darkling Plain. It's quite good, and I think it helps us see things from another perspective. So let's have the description, then we'll dive right into the session itself. Please don't stop our tapping across all platforms. Thank you very much. All right, let's get into this. Ken Saro paints a vivid picture of the tense atmosphere that followed the 1966 coup. He describes how Ironsi's policies and the influence of Igbo permanent secretaries pushed Nigeria toward a unitary structure. This move created deep suspicion across the country. as many felt that the civil service was being reshaped to favor those connected to the new power holders. As news spread that politicians and military officers from every region except the East were killed during the coup, emotions sharpened. The fact that prominent Igbo leaders survived became a source of taunting in some quarters and resentment in others. When Ẹkáàbọ announced the Unitary decree, anger in the north boiled over and people took to the streets. The reactions were tragic and violent as many Igbos were attacked. This chapter of history remains one of the most sensitive and painful parts of Nigeria's story. It reminds us of how political decisions can ripple through society in ways that change the course of a nation. Here is Ken Saro, the Untold reactions to Ẹkáàbọ's Unitary decree. While you listen, please power tap and share the live. Enjoy this video. Here's the point. So there's a book. I mentioned this book some time ago. I think I would like us to start with it, and then we'll go back to our main text. The book is called On a Darkling Plain, written by Ken Saro, the same one, Ken Saro. So I'm going to start with that, and then we'll move into this. But I'm trying not to go back to everything we've discussed. We've talked about the events leading to the coup from the perspective of Shehu Shagari. We've talked about what happened after the coup, immediately after the coup, and the 4 months, from January to May of 1966. And we also mentioned a bit of what happened in 1966 July last time when we read from Journey in Service by IBB, Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida, and we also read from Nigerian Civil War by John de St. George to understand, how the events, took place. Also, we read Crisis and Conflict in Nigeria by A.H.M. Green to have a better understanding of the events that led to the counter coup of July 1966. But I want to take us back just a bit, by reading this book, and then I'll connect you with something else, and then we'll go back to the main text. So this is On a Darkling Plain, written by Ken Saro. The young majors who were little known in Nigeria. The fact that the military kept a very low profile in the British tradition must have been responsible for this. The military were held in some contempt in the society, and it was assumed and said quite glibly that only those who were academically dull went into the army, even as officers. This was not entirely true, as the nation has since found out. Yet, it must be said that the most brilliant boys did not make a military career their first choice. Whenever people say things like, why is that a lot of Yoruba people were not there? Because, mostly it's because they went to school, and that would not be their first choice for the most part. Not to say that there were not people that were smart anyway. In the days after January 15, many of them are smart, as we know. In the days after January 15, very little news filtered through the coup makers. The fact that power eluded them kept them out of the limelight. The man of whom most was heard in those early days was Major Chukwuma Nzogu. The New Nigerian, a Kaduna-based newspaper, interviewed him, that's Chukwuma Nzogu, and published his photographs. He was said to be an ascetic who neither drank, smoked, danced, or womanized. Unmarried at the time of the coup, he was reputedly a brave and very efficient commander. He appeared to have been entrusted with the doubly difficult task of taking the north, and he was reported to have completed the task with great precision and elegance. Another name which was constantly mentioned was Major Ifajuna, who had studied at the University of Ibadan, where he stunned the sporting world by winning a gold medal in the high jump event at the Commonwealth Games of 1954. After graduating from Ibadan, he had taught in a school in Western Nigeria before joining the Nigerian Army. The rumor mill also flashed the name of Major Nwotegu, who was my contemporary at Government College, Umuahia. He had been captain of school, a good boxer, and long-distance runner. Even in those days, he was a strict disciplinarian, extremely hardworking, good-natured, with a loud laugh and a ready smile. Yet another name from the grapevine was Major Bieno from our sister college, Government College, Ueli. He had played cricket once or twice at Umuahia. Major Deja was also mentioned. I'm going somewhere. Some details of the coup have since become public property. Those who were involved in it and some army officers who were not have since written about it. Adewale Ademoyiga, a prime conspirator, has published Why We Struck, the story of the first Nigerian coup, Ẹkáàbọ about 1981, and Ben Bule, a participant in the coup, has written The Nigeria's Five Majors, published in 1981. Those two books we have read here, and we will still keep reading. These books, both very well written and very entertaining, taken with books by Alexander Madebo, who later headed the rebel army, and Joe Garba, current Nigeria's ambassador to the United Nations, give not only a succinct account of the coup, but also of conditions in the Nigerian army before the coup. They also explain why the coup failed, and from them we may draw certain conclusions. What is obvious from the books is the extent to which the cankerworm of tribalism had eaten into the fabric of the fledgling Nigerian army by 1965. Tribalism fanned by misinformation and misunderstanding. Ahmadu Bello's incompetent division of Nigeria into a north and a south at each other's throat had been bought hook, line, and sinker by the army officers. None of them who has written a book appears to have understood that the North is a mishmash of 200 different peoples, divided by cultures, languages, and religion. Even Joe Garba buys the idea of a South Nigeria, which immediately equates the advanced Yorubas of 10 million people with the 30,000 undeveloped Mbebes of the present Cross River State. Who is rewriting this? This is Ken Saro. I'll take that part again. Even Joe Garba South in quote, which immediately equates the advanced Yorubas of 10 million people with the 30,000 undeveloped Mbembes of the present Cross River State. On the basis of such false assumptions, hard lines are taken and hatred bred. In another instance, Igbo officers are grousing about the favors being bestowed on the northern officers, who, be it noted, are from different areas of the north, quote unquote, but they fail to realize that it was the same unfair process which enabled the Igbos to take more than 95% of the places which would have gone to the various ethnic groups in the eastern region, in eastern Nigeria. As to the political thinking which engineered the coup plot, there's also quite some model. Adewale Ademoyiga is convinced that a number of his colleagues, particularly the university graduates, went into the army in order to shape Nigeria in their fashion. But when he goes into details, he shows that they lacked basic understanding of the country and that their thoughts on the political organization of the country were half-baked. Unfortunately, there is hardly a clear body of thought as to how best Nigeria may be organized. There is actually, if you read Awolowo's books, which I think he has read as well, but if you read more, you will see a particular way. Since 1965, a number of books have been written on the subject, particularly by the late Chief Obafemi Awolowo, who is probably the best political thinker Nigeria has ever produced. The coup makers were idealistic. They also had some ideas, but these ideas would not, as you think, have saved Nigeria from a malaise. It has also been bandied about that the coup was an Igbo plot hatched by Igbo officers to enable the Igbos seize control of the Federation. In light of the evidence from the books, I am of the opinion that this is far from the truth. In light of the evidence I have had from more books and everything he has written, all the books he has recommended here, I have read. Well, I read more books than the one he has recommended. So in the light of the information I have from the other books, it was an Igbo coup. Just reading what he's saying, but I'm telling you what I think as well. Since 1966, there have been enough coups to convince everyone that a coup is a conspiracy, a dangerous conspiracy, and only friends and trusted associates engage in it. Such friends will be schoolmates, people from the same village or ethnic group. If, therefore, we find a large number of Igbos in the coup in 66, it is not surprising. There is enough to show that Zogo was very patriotic, and all the evidence is that he was a most detribalized Nigerian. Adewale Ademoyiga is not Igbo, and the murders which they unleashed, a senior officer who was Igbo was killed. The Igbo should on no account be calumniated for the coup. I don't think they should be calumniated for the coup. I don't think they should be insulted about the coup, but the coup was an Igbo coup. And like I always say, people who tried, and just about all of them were from a particular part of the country. And the one that the special branch report mentioned, which this book did not mention, by the way, maybe if you had read that book, you know, the document was published in 66, but was not released for many years. I don't even think it's up to 20 years that the book, that document was released into public space. I don't think it's up to 20 years. Although it was published for internal whatever since April of 66. So maybe if he had that information, he would not come to the same conclusion. But if you have the information around that, there are people who were involved, and you also see what happened with what people did, right? As soon as the coup was executed, you knew there was an ethnic thing. There's no, by the way, when you mention, this is the mistake that people make, and I've said this several times. If you have heard me before, you must have heard me say this. There's a mistake this man is making, which is what most people make, especially those who have good conscience, is to say that Zogu was not it was not an ethnic jingoist, right? It was a quote unquote detribalized, whatever that means. And then you have Adewale Ademoye guy was not Igbo and he had passion for Nigeria. You are right. But the reason you are saying that it is not Igbo based on those two is because you assume that the ideology that both of them had was what everybody had, which would be a lie. If they had the same ideology, how on earth was Oji and Okafor helping Ironsi and making sure it was not killed? How on earth was it that every political leader from the Southeast had an excuse and they all escaped? All of them. All. And the coincidences, sometimes they sound stupid. E.g., the one that Frederick Forsyth gave in his book, Biafran Story, and he was talking about Mbadiwe. He said Kingsley Mbadiwe ran across the lawn. This is in his book. He ran across the lawn and entered. Thank you for the gift. He ran across the lawn and entered into the president's residence. And that was the only place the coup plotters did not set. Are we joking? This is Forsyth, who is a propagandist on the side of the Igbos. He wrote it in his book. I've told you, the book is Biafran Story. He's saying that the man ran across the lawn and entered into that house, and that was the only house they did not set. And we know that the person that even owned that house was also part of the whole thing because he had left before the thing happened. And the same man who, quote-unquote, ran across the lawn is the same man in the afternoon who now wants to be the prime minister. So, like I always say, would have had an Igbo president, Igbo Senate president, Igbo prime minister, Igbo GOC. We also have Jaja Wachuku as Igbo House of Representatives speaker. So all of us. So he was an Igbo coup through and through. He has mentioned very fantastic books, but you've got to read more than those books in order to understand what really happened. You can't just stay with those ones. But again, no malice to anybody, just stating the facts or the materials. And the ridiculousness of the excuses. And every single one of the politicians from the Southeast had an alibi, including the GOC. Anyway. What is clear is that for various reasons, the coup failed. Major Ferdinand lies at the center of that failure, and we have not heard from him. Did he take fright? Well, Ademoye says of him, he always wanted to be in the good books of the senior officers in order to ensure his promotion in any event. These conflicting desires often clashed within him, making him inconsistent and at times unreliable. That's Ademoye's description of Ifajuna. By the way, if you read the book called Zogu by Olusegun Obasanjo, he also described him, and he didn't have very good words for Ifajuna. It was almost like the description was like an oxymoron, like a brave coward, someone that can ignite, something, and they run away. That kind of person. That was essentially what you find in that book. I don't want to open the book right now. Anyway, he's saying here that what Ademoye says of Ifajuna, quote, he always wanted to be in the good books of the senior officers in order to ensure his promotion in any event. These conflicting desires often clashed within him, making him inconsistent and at times unreliable, end of quote. Perhaps the key to the failure of the coup lies in the character of Ifajuna. We now know that Majors Zogu, Ademoye, Ifajuna, Okafor, Chukwuka, and Wotegu and Obienu led the coup. No, Obienu did not lead the coup. See, this is another interesting thing about these books. You know what? I don't want to spend time on these mistakes. Obienu was in on it. He pulled out of it and arrested the people that did it. And they called him a hero. We're going to have a session to discuss Obiano. That one is just a joke. He was in on it. Like, he wasn't part of the primary coup plotters, but he was brought in long before the execution of the coup. So they were good. It was going to, come from Abeokuta to Lagos and then, help execute the coup. And then just before the time, Domache, he now changed his mind. He now went after the people. They then said, oh, he was a hero. It's just a joke. I don't want to spend time on this. I'm trying not to go. I want to just go straight to what happened with Ironsi and then move on from there. The politicians had fled in disgrace following the January coup. Large numbers of them had been put in detention and the soldiers remained firmly in power. A problem arose from this fact. The soldiers who inherited power from the civilians belonged to a post-colonial administrative army created by the colonial powers largely for the purpose of supporting the colonial administration and the police in the preservation of internal order and frontier security. It was largely suited to colonial times. Its officers were trained in the insulated atmosphere of European training centers, although some of them had seen action in the Congo. It could not be said that any body of ideas on Nigeria had crystallized among them. True, the young majors who planned the January coup had nationalist ideas. Major Nzogu said that only in the army do you have any true Nigerianism, but they were an exception to the rule. In any case, with all of them in detention, that essential core was gone. Their successors clearly needed guidance and direction in the routine government duty of policy making and decision taking. The vacuum created by the absence of politicians from the scene was conveniently filled by career civil servants who suddenly found themselves in power at the center and in the regions. In place of an army of ministers, there was now a single military governor who was quite unused to public life and who in any case could not take direct responsibility for running the over 10 ministries in his region. The permanent secretaries of the various ministries therefore found themselves as both makers and executors of policy. Many appeared intoxicated by the newfound power, none more so than a handful of Igbo federal permanent secretaries, who now found a fellow Igbo in a position that carried unchallengeable power and prestige as head of state and supreme commander of the armed forces. As Ironsi himself proved pliable, the permanent secretaries moved in on him in one fell swoop. They led Ironsi to the slaughter. The occasion was the creation of what amounted to a unitary system of government in place of the federal system that had been in operation since the late 40s. The Igbo permanent secretaries in question had calculated, it was said, that under a unified system there would be free mobility of skill and labor, and that therefore several southerners, in quotes, or Igbos, who had been itching for jobs which the North traditionally reserved for, I'll take that again, that several Southerners, in quote, or Igbos who had been itching for jobs which the North traditionally reserved for Northerners or for expatriates would now go to the North to work. This ill-advised decision was duly placed before the Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces. They underestimated what reaction this would elicit from the North itself, where the inhabitants had been smarting under grunts from some Igbos resident there since the death of Ahmadu Bello, the Sardauna of Sokoto. His unyielding pride, some of his undiplomatic statements, and his rigorous defense of the interest of the North had not endeared him to many of his countrymen down south. Not so his followers in the North, to whom he was a formidable bulwark against Southern, in quote, domination. To decree a unitary system of government so soon after the death of the Sardauna looked as if they were being regarded as a conquered people. Their feeling of insecurity, which had led to such policies as northernization and public service, heightened. In May of 1966, they took out their anger on Igbos resident in the North in a cruel and unwarranted whirlwind of loot and destruction, which spread through the length and breadth of that region. This did not look like a spontaneous affair. It was definitely carefully calculated and was dastardly. I want to tell you why this is very, very important. There's a book I've been mentioning for a while. I like to play it. I like to read it. But I'm going to play you a video while I'm going to get that page. The book is called My Life. I'm going to play you something, an interview that I'm sure you have heard this before, that Ahmad Bello had with the BBC, and only one group in Nigeria thinks this is tribalistic. And I thought it was tribalistic at the point being smart. That's what a smart leader would do for his people, because it was not put there to lead Nigeria, but to lead his own people, his own region. But yeah, in case you have not heard it before, this was a 1964 interview. This is from the BBC. Take a listen, please.
One thing I've noticed, Premier, while I've been here, is that Northerners seem to have, I might almost call it, obsession about the Igbos. Could you perhaps explain that to me?
Well, the Igbos are more or less the type of people whose desire is mainly to dominate everybody. If they go to a village, a town, they want to monopolize everything in that area. If you put them in a labor camp as a laborer, within a year they will try to emerge as headman of that camp, and so on. Well, in the past, our people were not alive to their responsibilities, because you can see from our northernization policy that in 1952, when I came here, there weren't 10 northerners in our civil service here. Then I tried to have it northernized, and now all important posts are being held by northerners.
Is this policy of filling all key posts in the north temporary or permanent one?
In actual fact, what it is a northerner first. If you can't get a northerner, then we take an expatriate like yourself on contract. If we can't, then we can employ another Nigerian on contract too. This is going to be permanent, I should say, as far as I can foresee, because it would be rather dangerous to see the number of boys who are now turning from all our learning institutions, coming out with having no work to do. I'm sure whichever government of the day might be, it will feel rather embarrassed, and it might even lead to bloodshed.
Doesn't this damage the idea, sir, of all people in all regions in Nigeria being fellow citizens of one country?
Well, it might not, I mean, new to our region, but how many northerners are employed in the east or in the west? The answer is no. And if there are, there may be 10 laborers employed only in the two regions.
And the person who put this video on, I mean, a lot of people have had conversations on this and called him a tribalist for saying what he said. But I think he was being a leader, and what he said, there's nothing wrong in it. But I'll explain. I used to feel that, I mean, why would you have a problem with a person who is ambitious and wants to move up the ladder? Right? That's what life is about. You want to be better than what you were, before now. So you want to make sure that you're always getting better. Well, I was wrong. Apparently, it's not about somebody who is trying to get better. It's someone who is trying to dominate the place. In other words, it's not so much about getting better, moving up the ladder. It's about taking up the place to the point where even the owners of the land are dispossessed of what should be theirs. And if you remember what we read just now on the Darkling Plain by Ken Saro, he said 90% of slots that should have gone to the eastern region was cornered by one ethnic group, right? And that was where they had the majority. Where they had the minority, they brought people, let me read it. So, let me not be like Sayo's talks. Let me just read a bit of it. The vacuum created by the absence of politicians from the scene was conveniently filled by civil servants who suddenly found themselves in power at the center and in the regions. In place of an army of ministers, there was now a single military governor who was quite unused to public life and who, in any case, could not take direct responsibility for running the over 10 ministries in his region. The permanent secretaries of the various ministries therefore found themselves as both makers and executors of policy. Many appeared intoxicated by their newfound power, none more so than a handful of Igbo federal permanent secretaries, who now found a fellow Igbo in a position that carried unchallengeable power and prestige as head of state. and supreme commander of the armed forces. As Ẹkáàbọ himself proved pliable, the permanent secretaries moved in on him in one fell swoop. They led Ẹkáàbọ to the slaughter. The occasion was the creation of what amounted to a unitary system of government in place of the federal system that had been in operation since the late 40s. The Igbo permanent secretaries, I think it's somewhere here, the Igbo permanent secretaries in question had calculated, it was said, that under a unified system, this is where I'm going, under a unified system, there would be free mobility of skill and labor, and that therefore several Southerners, in quote, or Igbos, who had been itching for jobs, which the North traditionally reserved for Northerners or expatriates, would now go to the North to work. In other words, the North is saying our children are going to school, which is what the Sedona just said. You know, he said in the past we're not allowed to have responsibility, but right now we have a lot of young boys leaving universities. They are going to school. When they graduate, they should have jobs waiting for them. This was in the 60s. That's what happened in most regions. So they were trying to take care of their own people, Northerners first, just like what Anambra State is doing right now. Just becoming whatever your name is, just him. Anambra State put out a one of the criteria is that you must be an indigene of Anambra State. I don't see anybody crying that it was tribalistic. I don't even care whatever. Enugu came up with their own and said you must be from the ward, not state, not local government. From the, as a matter of fact, they could have said polling unit, from the ward of origin. I never heard of that thing until Enugu did it this year. You clowns don't see that as tribalistic, but you think Ahmadu Bello is tribalistic for saying that his own people first. He's not the premier of Nigeria, he's the premier of the North. These guys came up with an idea that, number one, they call it the unification of the civil services. We had 5 civil services in 1966. Lagos, let's stay with the regions, Ibadan, Kaduna, so Western region. Each region determined how people worked in their spaces. Western region, for instance, paid the highest in Nigeria, more than federal government. And of course, we have Lagos, which was the seat of the federal civil service, 5 civil services. These guys, these permanent secretaries, came up with the idea that they should unify all the civil services to become one federal civil service. In other words, all the regions are now under the direct command of one person. And that person can now fill that place wherever he likes. Therefore, what it means basically is this: you have less opportunities at home. Many people are moving out of your space, and this has always been since before independence. People are moving out into other people's regions to take their jobs because they are one Nigeria. That's a thief now. There's nothing wrong in what this man said if you are a leader. But if you are a thief, you think you have a problem with what he said. Why would you constantly move your people into a particular person's space to take over the jobs that are reserved for their own people? Meanwhile, in your own region, you have taken over 90% of the jobs belonging to the region and taken it as an ethnic group. And you did the exact same thing in the Midwest, where you're supposed to be the minority, but you are taking most of the major opportunities as far as civil service jobs were concerned in Benin, to the chagrin of folks in Edo, present the Edo State. They thought they were going to be the Oga. They discovered that, oh boy, these guys have a different idea. So you are doing it in the East, you are doing it in the Midwest, you are doing it in the North, you are doing it in Lagos. The only place you didn't have, where you did not dominate, was Western region. Because, how now? Couldn't even manage what you had before. So the North now said, you know what? Now, before independence, we're not going to school. We didn't have a lot of Western educated people. So it makes sense that the British had brought these people in. But now people are beginning to go to school. It's around 1962 thereabouts that they brought up that law. I'll see if I can find it for you guys, because I think it's without that, you might run with the idea that, oh, this man is a bigot and everything. 1 second, please. I'm going to read from his book, My Life. That's Ahmadu Bello. Or is it Amaju? In the mighty name. And thank you for what you're writing in the comment section. That's a funny thing. Nobody from the Southeast said anything when the government of Anambra State put out that advert. Not one person said, oh, how can you reserve this just for indigenes? But once you do it outside, that's when the eyes are looking for, bang, 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 who is the tribalist? You are the tribalist. You're not serious. You're a thief. Let me read to you what Saro says. It says, the regional government is fully aware of the need for the nationalization of all grades of the civil service of the region. As far as to appoint a northerner wherever it can be found. As proof of this, I am pleased to be able to tell the House that within the last 2 months, we have had 15 northerners appointed to the senior service compared to 29 over the past 5 years. In other words, in 2 months they got 15, but previous 5 years, they were only able to get 29. How are we to carry out this policy of nationalization in the future? There are two sources from which we may recruit for the senior service: from the experienced native administration officials and from scholars who have completed the university studies. We hope that native administrations will help by making available some of the experienced staff. There is, however, a grave danger that the efficiency of the local government system will be lower too if many of his employees, or if many of his best employees are absorbed into government service. 1 second, there's another one I want to read. It says, this is from, again, Untold's book. It says, we were very conscious, indeed, that the northern region was far behind the others educationally. We knew that individually, the educated northerners could hold their own against the educated southerners, but we simply had not got the numbers they had, nor had we people with the university degrees necessary as a qualification at that time for some of the higher posts. So in other words, what they're saying basically is that there was a time they knew that they were handicapped as far as educated professionals were concerned. But as soon as they began to have people, they needed to start putting them in certain places. So what does this have to do with what we're reading? I'm glad you asked. Here's the issue. It says, this is from, again, Untold's book. It says, we were very conscious, indeed, that the northern region was far behind
Mr. Laula Conde joins us now.
The others educationally. We knew that individually, the educated northerners could hold their own against the educated southerners, but we simply had not got the numbers they had, nor had we people with the university degrees necessary as a qualification at that time for some of the higher posts. So in other words, what they're saying basically is that there was a time they knew that they were handicapped as far as educated professionals were concerned. But as soon as they began to have people, they needed to start putting them in certain places. So what does this have to do? Excuse me. What does this have to do with what we're reading? I'm glad you asked. Here's the issue. What they've been able to do, see what they said, in 2 months, they got what they couldn't have gotten in 5 years. In terms of if they were going at the pace they were going for 5 years, in fact, let me read the number again. In the last 2 months, they have had 15 northerners appointed to the senior service, compared with 29 over the past 5 years. So they got 15 in 2 months, but they got 29 in 5 years. So the fact that they were not getting educated and they had northernized the civil service meant that they could get as many as 15. I mean, that's nothing in the south, especially in the west, but that would be something to them in the north, because 15 in 2 months, I mean, in 2 weeks, in 2 months, 15 in 2 months is a lot. Now, here's the issue. Once Ironsi comes along and the Igbo permanent secretaries began to advise him, they are going to reverse all the gains that the northerners had made from 64 to 66. So what they're going to do is to centralize the civil service and then get to move people into the north. And if you say it did not, it could not have happened. Let me tell you what happened in 67. August of 1967, the Biafran forces invaded the Midwest. One of the things that happened after that invasion was that Ojukwu moved civil servants from Enugu into Benin. Read the book, Minority Response to Biafran Invasion and Occupation by Uyilawa Oswanlele. That's the document. If you can find it, please do. Minority Response to Biafra's Invasion and Occupation and Nigeria's Liberation by Uyilawa Oswanlele. They moved Guys, sorry, I have to mute this clown. I don't have time for rubbish. Here's the point. Even at the time, you know what? I wasn't supposed to read this, but because I hate it when people write things like maybe he's lying and things in the comment section. That's why I read all these things. To be honest, I could just go on saying it. But let's look for that document. May not be like say they make something up. Jilabi, give me a second, please. Minority rights and the national question, or the minority rights response, or the Midwest response to Biafran occupation and invasion. Let me read to you what he said about that. Number one, because it's important to be doing this now. Yes, you just have these clowns writing rubbish in the comment section. What they were planning to do in the Midwest was terrible. I found it. The Biafran invasion of the Midwest was also regarded as an Igbo affair. As a result, many Igbo were sent to the Midwest by the Biafran government. One instance of this was the appointment of senior Eastern Igbo civil servants into the Midwest public service without due process on the orders from Biafran authorities in Enugu. I just read that document. That's what I quoted earlier. People were moved from Enugu into Benin, into the Midwest, to become Oga during the war. As a matter of fact, if you have the time, you can read the document. It will tell you about how Ojukwu was asking them to pay a certain amount of money to Enugu from all the Midwest corporations. They're supposed to send a particular amount of money to Enugu, and that's why whenever they tell you that Ojukwu was not going to Lagos, was just going through the Midwest to go to Lagos because it was federal capital, it's nonsense. Ojukwu invaded and what's the word? What's that word after invasion? There's a word, they occupied. He invaded and occupied the Midwest, appointed an Igbo, but it has to be Igbo, an Igbo governor, about to conquer, and then mandated that a certain amount of money that they make in that region must be repatriated to the eastern region, to Enugu. He then sent public servants from Enugu into the Midwest to become senior civil servants. That was in 1967. 1 year after the unification of the civil services. In other words, whatever you think they're trying to do in 1966 that Saro is talking about is exactly what Ojukwu did in 1967. That's the point I'm trying to make. Does this mean that the North is always right? Of course not. But on this matter, they were correct. You're not going to make what is theirs national in the name of unity. By the way, all this thing of let's all share it together because that means that we're all Nigeria is a tactic of a thief. Whatever is yours, take it like that. Let your ambition be curtailed with wisdom. In other words, be ambitious enough to build your place into a paradise, not ambitious to go to other people's places and take over what they have and tell them that we not all want Nigeria. Are you saying that they don't have people that can do those things? Must be you. Because you are nomadic in your mindset, and I'm speaking specifically to just him and his folks. You guys don't think. And that's the crazy part. You sound exactly like your elders, which means you're going to make the exact same mistakes they made, and you're going to have the same repercussions. So that means there's no growth. Well, continue. God be with you. Waje foya. You know what that means? Waje sombe ya. Where were we? The Igbo permanent secretaries in. Okay, let me go back just a bit. So he was talking about that there was a vacuum after, the military took over, the politicians left, and the civil servants moved up. Now remember that before this, many of the permanent secretaries were already Igbos. And I recommended a document the other day. If you check our Telegram channel, Redomi Global, it's free. You don't have to pay anything to join. Redomi Global. If you go to the learning section, learning resources section, you will find a document called White Paper on Political Alignment of Western Region. White Paper on Political Alignment in Western Nigeria. Please look at that. Find that paper. It's right there. It's free. You can download it. Here's the point I'm trying to make. before these military guys took over, they were already dominating the civil service. And they did not do it because they had merit. They did it because of they did it using nepotism. They filled the entire place with their own people. Never mind whether they were qualified or not qualified. Qualification is secondary. The real thing is ethnicity. That was what got you there. E.g., there was a man who got a job, was Njoku, who got a job after retiring. He was a messenger. He retired. They brought him back. Guess what they made him? They made him the head of a recruitment, staffing recruitment committee. Messenger will now recruit the engineers and the chief executive officers or whatever of the organization of the NRC, Nigeria Railway Corporation. Is in that document. In fact, there's another document, the one that one is from the Commission of Inquiry, where one of those Igbo guys asked the Yoruba engineer, what you go give us smoke with chop or something like that. That one now saying he cannot eat. Ridiculous questions that have nothing to do with engineering. There's a Commission of Inquiry that was set up into how these people were recruited. And it is damning. The report is damning, right? But maybe if we have the time, we'll check it out some other time. But if you want to know what the civil service was like, download that document in the Telegram channel, White Paper on Political Alignment in Western Region. It was published by NCNC, the Western Caucus, and what they saw were in the hands of our wonderful brethren. So after the politicians had run away, of course, ran away because they had killed most of them, but many of them, and there was no need for them to even be in Lagos anyway. The vacuum created by the absence of politicians from the scene was conveniently filled by career civil servants who suddenly found themselves in power at the center and in the regions. In place of an army of ministers, there was now a single military governor who was quite unused to public life and who in any case could not take direct responsibility for running the over 10 ministries in his region. The permanent secretaries of the various ministries therefore found themselves as both makers and executors of policy. Many appeared intoxicated by the newfound power, none more so than a handful of Igbo federal permanent secretaries, who now found a fellow Igbo in a position that carried unchallengeable power and of the armed forces. As Ironsi himself proved pliable, the permanent secretaries moved in on him in one fell swoop. They led Ironsi to the slaughter. The occasion was the creation of what amounted to a unitary system of government in place of the federal system that had been in operation since the late 40s. The Igbo permanent secretaries in question had calculated, it was said, that under a unified system, listen to this, there would be free mobility of skill and labor, and that therefore several Southerners or Igbos, that's what they wrote there, or Igbos who had been itching for jobs, which the North traditionally reserved for Northerners or for expatriates, those people will now go to the North to work. Why? I will not want Nigeria. This ill-advised decision was duly placed before the Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces. They underestimated what reaction this would elicit from the North itself, where the inhabitants had been smarting under grunts from some Igbo resident there since the death of Ahmadu Bello, the Sultan of Sokoto. In other words, since January, folks in the North have had to endure the taunting of Igbo residents in the North, in Kaduna, in Kano, insulting them. We played the song there the other day. It's not very nice. You know, Machine Gun by Celestine Oku, Ewu Nabakwa by Rex Lawson, just playing this in the public parks, you know, taunting the people. That was already on the ground, though. That they never do anything about that one. They can't go say you go unify everything. Now, change your spark. I suppose the Sardauna was something of an where was I? They underestimated the reaction that this would elicit from the North itself, where the inhabitants had been smarting under grunts from some Igbo residents there since the death of Ahmadu Bello, the Sultan of Sokoto. I suppose the Sardauna was something of an ogre down south. His unyielding pride, some of his undiplomatic statements, and his rigorous defense of the interests of the North had not endeared him to many of his countrymen down south. Not so his fellow followers in the North, to whom was a formidable bulwark against Southern Red Igbo domination. To decree a unitary system of government so soon after the death of the Sardauna looked as if they were being regarded as a conquered people. their feeling of insecurity, which had led to such policies as northernization, which we read about earlier, and the imposition of certain ill-qualified personnel of the federal public service heightened. Where were those ill-qualified people from? From Igbo land. Again, I should say this, if you are Igbo, sincerely, from my heart, it's not an attack on you. I'm not saying you're a bad person, but your so-called leaders did the worst in Nigeria's history as far as, I mean, it's just terrible. Nobody only passed so, but man, it was terrible. In May of 1966, they took out their anger on Igbos resident in the north in a cruel and unwarranted, I don't know if it's unwarranted, because they took a lot. They took a lot from January to May. They were seething. Kimieti Wambe on Sima was simmering. Just waiting, it's like gunpowder. Any spark by Ogbano Jenny. So he says, but this is what he wrote. He says in May of 1966, they took out the anger on Igbos resident in the north in a cruel, and it was cruel, unwarranted whirlwind of loot and destruction, which spread through the length and breadth of that region. This did not look like a spontaneous affair. It was definitely carefully calculated and was dastardly. Basically, Ironsi's decision was wrong in the extreme. His declared reason was that since the army's approach to administration was monolithic, the same system ought to be applied in the administration of the country. If that were so, because you're writing nonsense in the comment section. The point is this, and by the way, I did a video a while back, please check it out on YouTube. It's called How Ojukwu Rejected Aburi. Because even though what he wanted was preposterous, he still got it. Was a decree that was passed in March of 1967, decree number 8, that Yakubu Gowon promulgated in March of 67. That was a decree that would have given Ojukwu what he wanted, but he said no. We have another conversation about that, but if you really want to know about it, please check out the video on YouTube channel. Search Busui Ores, How Ojukwu Rejected Aburi. Especially if you're Igbo, a lot of the things that they've told you, na lie, Fulam, na lie. Some of the books I referred to in that book, in that video, a number of them are actually books written by Eastern authors. N.U. Akpan, as the secretary to the government of the Eastern region, N.U. Akpan, and also Ilarim Joku, who was the commander of the Biafran army. Those two wrote about what happened with decree number 8 in March of 67 and Ojukwu's reaction to that decree. Please watch that video. Anyway, let's go back to this. I was saying that if he also wants to make the argument, which is fair, I mean, you can make the argument that whatever is good for the goose is also good for the gander. Gowon could make that argument as well. Why? Is the military has not changed. Has the military tradition changed in 2 days? He also was in power up until July 29, 1967. Gowon became head of state August 1. Between July 29 and August 1, what has changed in military traditions that would allow Gowon to decentralize power and ensure that it was not having all the power like a dictator should? And the crazy part, the real crazy part is that he still passed that, he still came up with a decree that essentially weakened him, which is what Ironsi would never have done. Which is what Ojukwu would never have done. How do I know? Because May of 66, Ojukwu was the one who was trying to get his Attorney General in this region to write a decree, the same decree, what's called Unitary decree that became decree number 34. How do I know that? Because the man, the Attorney General, wrote a book. The book is called Ojukwu's Rebellion and World Opinion, and the man's name is Nebo Graham Douglas. Ojukwu was saying, I should write a unitary constitution in May of 66. Is it Ojukwu that will now decentralize power if it was the one who was heading? Meanwhile, as at June of 66, he was already telling how he wanted to become the head of the country. June 7, 1966. Read that book. By the way, that book is also free on Redmi Global. Those are the only few. Okay, there's some free stuff there because it's difficult to come by some of those materials. But read those things, especially if I'm from the Southeast. Please read those things, please. Don't just. They don't lie to you too much. I beg. We'll continue. I beg. Where were we? Basically, Ironsi's decision. I'm reading the book On a Darkling Plain by Saro. Basically, Ironsi's decision was wrong in the extreme. His declared reason was that since the army's approach to administration was monolithic, the same system ought to be applied in the administration of the country. But there was nothing to support that assumption. The federal nature of the country had not in any way impeded military rule. Besides, Ironsi himself had set up a constitutional committee, and to act as he did was to prejudice its report. Ironsi set up a constitutional committee. Then there was under committee of one man, his name Francis Nwokedi. Where that man came from, you can tell yourself. You can tell. That person now came up with a single man, like a minority report, that we need unitary system in Nigeria, and they adopted it. Why? Because the permanent secretaries in the civil service who were Igbos and the civilians in NCNC. Read the book by Adewale Ademoyiga. That's exactly what he said. He said what Ironsi did was to implement NCNC policies. One of the major policies that NCNC had way back in 1951 was unitary system. That was long before independence. Zika started with his book in 1943, talking about, why we should have a federal system. By the end of the 1940s, he had changed his mind. By 51, they were pushing hard to have a unitary system in Nigeria. Right? The book in 43 is called The Political Blueprint for Nigeria. It was a pamphlet that Zik published in 1943. By 1949-50, they were changing everything. By 51, they were pushing hard for unitary system. They didn't get it for 15 years. As soon as Ironsi got there, one man's report changed everything. Even though there was a committee sitting, nobody cared about what the committee was saying. Since there was nothing to support that assumption, the federal nature of the country had not in any way impeded military rule. Besides, Ironsi himself had set up a constitutional committee, and to act as he did was to prejudice its report. Federalism had been a subject of national debate for a long time, and if anything at all, the trend was towards broadening the base of federalism, certainly not towards a unitary system. The uprising in the north was a sign of things to come. It should be noted, though, that Yakubu Gowon did the same thing through the back door. As will be seen later, his action in seizing the oil resources of minority peoples added to his total control of the military governors in the various states, effectively diluted the federal base of the country and imposed something like a unitary system, while succeeding military administrations have reinforced, which the succeeding military administrations have reinforced. Apparently, Gowon could do it, but Ironsi was not allowed to do it. That's the point. You see, Ironsi did it. You can't blame Gowon for doing the same. But guess what? Let's even say we want to blame Gowon. Why I cannot blame Gowon personally was because he did something that I don't think any military, I don't know if anybody has done it before. Please let me know. Everybody has a lot to learn. I don't know of any military ruler who would decentralize and grant the regions or states autonomy and make himself less powerful, instead invest that power in the Supreme Military Council, not in himself. And in that Supreme Military Council, the governors of the region can decide what will happen. If they are against whatever he wants to do, he cannot do it. This is what was in the decree number 8, though. I don't know of any military dictator or head of states that would do that. I don't. If you know, please let me know. That was what he did in March. Ojukwu rejected it. If you read, I mentioned it also earlier, but I didn't mention the name of the books. N.U. Appan wrote a book called The Struggle for Secession. In that book, he was the secretary of the government of the Eastern region. He was with Ojukwu in Aburi, January 4 and 5, 1967. He wrote a book, The Struggle for Secession. You know what he said? He said Decree number 8 gave Ojukwu 95% of what he asked for in Aburi. 95. If you read The Tragedy Without Heroes, was written by Hilary M. Njoku. Hilary Njoku was the head of Biafra military, the very first one, before Madiabo came along later. Njoku was the head of the Biafra military. Njoku said in his book that when he went to Ojuku's office, his private secretary, his first name is Don, that man was a lawyer. That man told him, Njoku, that Decree number 8 was 98% of what they asked for in Aburi, and that the other 2% is just military jargons that you cannot understand, but that the real thing, that everything they want is that's 98%, but that the other 2% is just military jargon that's unnecessary. I don't want to open because of time, but I really read it. I read those 2 documents. If you watch that video, how Ojukwu rejected Aburi. The point I'm trying to make is that if NU Akpan is saying you got 95%, and Hilary Njoku is saying you have Don Egbe, that's his name. The private secretary's name is Don Egbe, right? He was a lawyer, and he's saying that they had 98% of what they asked for in Aburi, and you still say no. If I were Yakubu Gowon, I would do exactly what Yakubu Gowon did. Say you don't want decentralization, Abi, until you break everything apart. That's what you want. Oh yeah, create new states time. But I really read it. I read those 2 documents. If you watch that video, how Ojukwu rejected Aburi. The point I'm trying to make is that if NU Akpan is saying you got 95%, and Hilary Njoku is saying you have Don Egbe, that's his name. The private secretary's name is Don Egbe, right? He was a lawyer, and he's saying that they had 98% of what they asked for in Aburi, and you still say no. If I were Yakubu Gowon, I would do exactly what Yakubu Gowon did. Say you don't want decentralization, Abi, until you break everything apart. That's what you want. Oh yeah, create new states. May 27, 1967. Create new states. Break that Eastern region into 3. The Western region was already broken into 2, Abi. Break the remaining one, break into 2 again. So we have 6 in the south. Then break the north into 6. Everything is now 12. Come and do your worst. And what's the worst that he did? May 30, he declared Biafra. And then eventually, that's how if you look at the trajectory, nobody should have died in the Eastern region. If you are from the East and you think about all the people that died and the hunger, the only person, in fact, you can blame everybody, but the only person responsible for the carnage was Ojukwu. But no, is a guru. You will extol the one who is wrong and demonize the one who is helping or who helped you, because we all have to bear it together. I don't bear nonsense. All of this to say that, especially if you're from the south and you're listening to this, it's not an attack on your region. It's an expose on what leaders from your space did. And if you take it as an attack on your region, what you're doing is that you're trying to tell us to shut up because it makes you feel uncomfortable. But nobody cares about your feeling. Not because they don't matter, but because they don't really count. I don't know what difference that is. In other words, they matter to you, they don't count to us. The best we can do is to share these things respectfully. But we can't just hide and sweep everything under the carpet and allow you, right, the children of those who wronged us, to insult us and our fathers who were wronged. That's not going to happen. May God bless you. Where were we? So they were talking about the fact that he changed everything, and I'll read a few more things before we go back to that, but I hope we can get to the book before we go tonight. Ironsi, again, the book is called On a Darkling Plain. This particular one is by Ken Saro. And by the way, I think this man, sincerely, was very gracious to Igbos. Very. I think it was even too much. Himself and this other author, Elechi Amadi, the Ikwere man, they were very gracious. They're very gracious. But some people still insult them, but I mean, it's okay. Let's keep reading. Ironsi, in his perpetual dilemma of trying to please everybody, appeared to be at a loss what to do. The Igbos were predictably and rightly too angry at the May riots. They were even more furious at Ironsi's failure to take decisive action against the rioters. They began to contemplate a return to their homeland, but they were advised against this, seeing that the balance of power in the Federation still rested with them. As Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces and Head of State, the military governorship of the East, the Solicitor General of the Federation, and a host of powerful permanent secretaries and diplomatic representatives abroad, having filled up those spaces using nepotism. I had to say that. Eventually, Ironsi was pleased to appoint a commission of inquiry into the May riots. This soothed the Igbos somewhat. The sign of coming squalls had by this time become quite predictable. It was visible in most national institutions. It was at about this time, it was at about this same period that Ironsi made a number of promotions in the army. It was said that about 80% of those promoted were Igbos. Calculators. I need a calculator. Let's confirm. Where's my calculator? 18 divided by 21 times 100 is 85.71%. It's 85.71%. This is not 80%. It's 85.71. They were going to promote 18 Igbo officers. Then someone told them that I was so Igbo. So now put 3. And by the way, if you read the book that they're always shouting about, you find it there. And they were a guy's book, Why We Struck. 18 Igbo officers, 3 Northerners promoted above their Ogas, the 5 Yoruba. So you had 21. So that's 85.7%. It's more than 80%. I knew it. My math was mathing. Is right. It didn't say exactly, so it's correct. About 80% of those promoted were Igbos. Again, there were grumblings, particularly from the north. The point was made that those promoted merited it, and that in fact they had been discriminated against in the past. No one wants to hear that sort of thing in Nigeria, especially if the beneficiaries of any act happen to be of the same ethnic origin as the benefactor. By the way, some of the people that also committed the planned and executed the coup were also promoted while in detention, collecting salaries and watching TV. These promotions shook the army to its very foundation. Ironsi had to make a hurried tour to the north to address troops there. All right. Thank you very much for listening. We've been listening to Saro, Wiwa, the Untold reactions to Ironsi's Unitary decree. And like I said earlier, I think it's important that we listen to different perspectives. We see different perspectives and listen to different speakers and authors, right, as they share their thoughts about what happened, so that we're not, carried away by a particular narrative. Because, like somebody said, the danger of a single story. Anyway, that was Ken Saro, and we're reading his book On a Darkling Plain. I'd like to see if anybody wants to react, and then if there are any questions. But I'm going to start by reading comments on YouTube, and then we'll have a bit of interaction before we close today. By the way, if you're joining us for the first time, we have the sessions every weekday, Monday to Friday at 4 p.m. Ife time, West African time. Tuesdays and Thursdays, we don't come on camera, we just listen. But tomorrow, we shall be on camera. And tomorrow we're going to continue with the series. No, we're actually starting, because we were supposed to start yesterday, but we didn't. So tomorrow we're going to start a new series, The Evolution of Christianity in Yoruba Land. So join us tomorrow, 4 p.m. and on all platforms. All right, so excuse me. So let's read some reactions here on YouTube. Good evening, Origin Stories. Thank you for being here. Good evening, Akadol. Thank you for joining us. Whitey Kubo says Ojuku was trying to do what Olowu Asokungbade did as a toddler, who cried and cried until Oduduwa, his grandfather, gave him an Ife beaded crown. But in his own case, it was his family inheritance. Interesting. New Era says Ironsi didn't try to please everyone. No, he didn't try to please the Eastern minorities or the Yorubas. You are right. You are right. And I was saying earlier that if you read the book that he was always telling you to go, when you start talking about the war, the coup, or whatever, they say, go and read Adewale Ademoye Gasbo, go and read Why We Struck. And I've said it several times, they don't advise you to read the book because they've read it, they've never read it. In fact, many of them don't even know what the front page looks like or the cover. They don't know. All they know is the fact that a Yoruba man wrote it, and the Yoruba man was part of the coup. Therefore, it means that they don't have to bear the burden alone. Interestingly, in that book, what you're going to discover about Ironsi, for instance, was that when it was time for him to promote people, he was going to promote 18 Igbo officers, right? And then, for some reason, they decided to dilute it, and by adding 3 Northern officers. The crazy part is that they jumped over Yoruba officers. 5 of them were not promoted, but 18 Igbos were promoted with 3, And if you read the interview granted by T.Y. Danjuma, he mentioned that some of the people that were promoted were even in prison for the coup. He said they were there in the prison collecting salaries and watching TV. So it's true, Ironsi's regime did not. It's similar to one of the presidencies that we had not too long ago, when the Yorubas were essentially pushed out of power, But then, of course, if it benefits you, you say it benefits everybody. So thank you for that comment. Let's go on. Solagunju Emmanuel, thank you for being here. Says Igbos accuse everybody till today. They regard Awolowo as their only enemy, while their father, Dr. Azikiwe, who stole their money, is still regarded as a saint till today. Well, I think it's easier for people to point fingers than to look in the mirror. And that's the dilemma, and that's the conundrum folks in the South have found themselves. May God deliver them. All right, that's about it on YouTube. I think many of the stuff on TikTok I already responded to. Did I? Let me just quickly check. Oh, Shemoba says, thank God for this professor for his deep understanding of Nigerian history. Thank God. Even me, I'm thanking God for helping all of us learn together. Yamanite says, even Aboki, BYO says the language is tribal bigot. They just discovered the word in 2025. And Yamanite says, even Aboki supporting ADC are now using it. Check out Zamfara is dragging a whole Lagos on X. That happens. I think it is what it is. Everybody will be all right. All right, that's about it. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about some things happening in the news. The federal government, something is about to give, right? And it's good news, by the way. Something good is about to happen. The President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, has given a directive to the National Assembly. Well, not a directive, just like... Anyway, the point is that he's favorably disposed to the idea of state police, and he has said that states that want to have state police should be allowed to have state police. And the other thing we're going to discuss tomorrow, but all I'm saying is that it looks like things are about to change. The whole thing about restructuring, state policing, resource control, all those things are coming together, and I'd love to see it. Right, and we're praying that we're going to see all these things manifest in no time, because we don't do the way all these things are going. Nigeria cannot work like this, that's the truth. All right, I'm going to read some things from YouTube. Let me see if there's any, from Facebook. Just some comments here. Justice Igoni says you're very correct, thank you. Dedun IS Fatikon says, please make use of your platform to encourage our people to join army. If not, one ethnic group will dominate our military and we shall all be in mess of slavery. Oh, really? I think I don't know what's happening right now, but I know that there is quota. They use federal character in the army, so you can't just. It's not the way it was before independence. I think they have this quota, so each state has a number, but I don't know if they still work based on it. But I know that even last people to, indigenes of Lagos to enroll in the army because each state has a quota that they have to fill up. So, but thank you for saying that. David also says Igbo are the most bigoted. Jesus Christ. Anyway, what you're saying is that they are bigoted, but they always play a game of victim of being marginalized. They say Yoruba are tribal, lies, but the tactics of making non-tribal Yoruba guilty of being tribal as a means to dominate our world. It says Igbo claim that Ojukwu removed Awo from prison. How true is that? It's not true. It's not true. This same book we just read now, On a Darkling Plain by Saro, he mentioned, but let me make something very clear. 1963 was when Papa was jailed, right? 1966 January, Ironsi takes over. 1966 March, Aolo writes a letter to Ironsi asking that the government would pardon him because, of course, it was a kangaroo, it was a sham. The whole trial, like it was a lie and everything. That was in March. July 1966, 29th July, was when Ironsi was unalived, was killed. August 1 was when Gowon took over, became head of state. August 1st. August 3rd was when Aolo was released. The only thing Ojukwu had to do with it was to send a telegram. What I'm saying right now about that telegram stuff, you find it in the book On a Darkling Plain by Saro. All he did was send a telegram to Awo, and he told Awo in that telegram that it was Ironsi who granted him pardon. Of course, nonsense, is a lie. He wrote a letter to him in March. He was there for 6 months, didn't do anything. Gowon got there, and in 2 days, Awo was out of prison. The Gazette for his pardon came out on the 12th of August. Ojukwu goes ahead to say, he writes a telegram message to Aolo saying, let me see if I can read it to you so that it doesn't look like I'm just talking. Give me a second. I think one of the things that we've had, in this country is just a group of people bent on lies, like it's going out of fashion. It's a crazy stuff. All right. So it says here. 1 second. So it's about this. I'm reading again. I'm reading the book On a Darkling Plain by Saro. This is page 41. It was about this time that Lieutenant Colonel Gowon set Chief Awolowo and Chief Enaoro free. Gowon himself received Chief Awolowo. By the way, I played the video here on one of our, stuff here on TikTok, Facebook, YouTube. You see it online in some of our channels. In our channels, you will see the video about Awolowo being welcomed by Gowon at the airport. I'll read this again. It was about this time that Lieutenant Colonel Gowon set Chief Awolowo and Chief Enaoro free. Gowon himself received Chief Awolowo at the airport and assured him that the nation would still need his services. The Yoruba people went berserk with joy. I say the Yoruba people advisedly, then I'm going to jump to the other part. The act of freeing Awolowo pleased the Yorubas immensely. Although Ojukwu sent Awolowo a telegram of congratulations on his release from detention, affirming that the decision to release him was one of the last acts of the Ironsi regime, the Yorubas did not appear willing to believe him. More so, the Igbos had appeared to be courting the North, as witnessed his installation by Ojukwu of the Emir of Kano as Chancellor of the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. Credit for the release of Awolowo went solidly to Gowon. So even Ojukwu himself, when Awo was released from prison, the telegram he sent to Awo was that it was Ironsi who released him. So back in 66, Ojukwu was saying, that's one of the last acts of the Ironsi regime. So when did this thing change? Let me quote something. There's a book by Odia Ofemon. The book is called The Forgotten Documents of the Nigerian Civil War. In that book, he quoted an interview that Ojukwu granted Boston newspaper, Boston Magazine, in the early 2000s. And in that paper, he said he was the one who released Awo. One of the things I can say about Ojukwu is that he's a liar. He was a liar, and his lies live after him. Number one, he could not have released Awo because he was the military governor of a region, not the head of state of Nigeria. The military does not require anybody to do anything. The president does not require the governor to attend to anything. He was just there it was an administrative post. It was not the organ of anybody. That's one. Number two, he himself said that it was Ironsi that did it after Awolowo was released, as we just read from this book right now. That tells you that even he, at the time, from the beginning, he was lying. And that's why in 1983, Awolowo called him irredeemable. And I agreed. I don't think it was redeemable till he went back to his maker. So whatever you hear the kids say right now, and when I say kid, they could be 60, I don't care, they think like children. When kids start saying things like, oh, it was Ojukwu that released Awo, ask them for proof. They'll start cursing you out because there's no proof, there's no evidence. You just talk, no evidence. So no, to answer your question, Awolowo was released by Gowon, not Ironsi nor Ojukwu. And one of these days, I think we should have a session on the trial of Awolowo and also, his time in prison. And we have some books we're going to use when we get to that. We want to have that session. So don't get carried away by the propaganda from the Southeast. Ojukwu could not even that he did not, he could not have released Awolowo, and definitely did not release Awolowo. And there are videos of Awolowo being welcomed at the airport, and there's a Federal Gazette that was published on August 12, and it was released on August 3. So don't believe these lies from the pit of hell. Be like say hell gets branch for some parts of Nigeria. It is well, but it is well. May God help us and deliver us from lies. All right, I think I've answered the question. That's the only question I see here. Thank you very much for that question. I hope you got the answer. I mean, not the answer you want, but the answer that is, it's what it is. That's the answer anyway. All right, thank you very much for being here. We're going to call this a day now. Thank you thank you for being with us, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube or here. Other videos talking about Nigerian history, politics, culture, and Yoruba culture as well. Thank you very much for being here. A new video is coming out. I think about 2 videos are coming out later today. One is just on TikTok right now, talking about the controversy that Nnamdi Kanu's incarceration has caused in the Southeast or amongst the Igbos. People are saying different things, and it's important to listen to them. And everybody's not thinking the same way. Thankfully, we have the exceptions. I always say there are exceptions, right? So you have a rule. The rule is that you must be IPOP, but there are exceptions, and those exceptions are beginning to speak up, and it's important to also listen to them. So please check that out on TikTok and also on YouTube, on every platform. It's on TikTok now. It will be on YouTube in the next 1 hour or so. Thank you very much for being here. Do have a lovely evening. But before we go, like we always do, we're going to play the anthems, the Nigerian anthem and the Yoruba anthem. Please sing along. If you don't know, if you don't know the lyrics, I beg, learn the lyrics. We're all Nigerians. Always. Okay, so here's the Nigerian anthem. God bless Nigeria.
Nigeria, we hail thee, our own dear native land. Though tribe and tongue may differ,
àwa ni ìmọ́lẹ̀ ògo adúláwọ̀ ìmọ́lẹ̀ wọ̀ ní wọ́pọ̀ lágbára ọlọ́run ilẹ̀ Yorùbá ò ní bàjẹ́ Nàìjíríà náà ò ní bàjẹ́ ilé wa máa gbèrú sí lágbára ọlọ́run ilé wa náà wà nǹkan tó bá dáwọ́lé a máa yọrí sí rere. Thank you very much for being here. May God bless you and keep you, and may God bless your family and our dear country Nigeria. Do have a lovely evening. I'll see you again tomorrow 4 p.m. Ife time, West African time. Odaro.